do want to apologize to start. Coming off of a cold, so I'm a little more annoying sounding than I normally sound. But what I want to do is kind of step through a bit of a story that kind of evolved from a larger project that I was privileged to take part of, and we're going to talk through it today. Here's the thing. I like informal conversations. There's slides up here. There's a stenographer who's going to really enjoy everything I have to say, I'm sure. And then, yeah, there's a video camera, so I'll remember all the bad things I say later. But let's make this interactive. You know, there's a few of us left, and I do appreciate everyone that's stuck around to the end here. If you have questions, if you want to throw challenges out, go for it. Really look forward to a debate and having a healthy conversation. So we'll jump straight into it. So today, we're gonna step through and we're gonna talk about the Agile Manifesto authors. We're gonna talk about a series of interviews that I was privileged to conduct with them. If you're not familiar with the Agile Manifesto, we could talk about that very quickly. John Kern, who happens to be one of the authors, he actually ended, I think, the interview or the sit down I had with him with basically saying, four measly bullets and all this shit happened. So the enterprise, the industry, everything that happened around it really just started to shift after they codified everything down into 4 bullets. And it's those this over that statements. If you haven't seen it before, agilemanifesto.org has basically the 4 bullets, and then there's a second page that hardly anyone ever goes to where there's 12 principles that are detailed as well. But we're going to go through, we're going to kind of talk about those simple 4 bullets. Right? I'm going to turn that into 45 minutes of me talking and you guys wanting to get on a train. All right, so what are we going to hopefully cover today? We're going to talk about what Agile is, or at least my definition. When you, Tom gave a great talk yesterday about the same time but the same place. And he said you ask 10 different DevOps practitioners what DevOps is, you get 11 different answers. He was being conservative. I posit that you have 25 to 30 different definitions. Same thing happens in Agile, right? So I'll try to construct a definition of Agile that makes sense to me, what I've experienced and what I feel is really meaningful. We'll talk a little bit about what the Agile Manifesto is, just to baseline everyone to make sure that, you know, this thing that I'm going to be talking about, everyone kind of has a baseline on. I'm going to talk about extreme programming. I'm going to assume that we have a lot of ops folks in the room, sysadmins and such. Extreme programming at the very highest level was originally a framework that was launched by a bunch of the guys that were the Agile Manifesto authors. So when I talk about extreme programming XP, think about that. But what really came out of it and what still stands today is a set of practices that are still in place. So if you think about like refactoring, if you hear people talk about test-driven development, pair programming, collective code ownership, those types of things, those are the practices that still stand today that were introduced back in the XP days. What the hell does all this have to do with DevOps? We'll get there. Just ride the wave with me, and I promise you we'll get there. And then I'm going to talk about how arrogant I could possibly be. If you've seen a couple Contino people around, they will stand behind the sentence that Ryan is a very arrogant jackass. So we'll get into that too. So speaking of the arrogance, the way this talk started was like all good things. I was sitting in a bar with my friends, right, practitioner friends, and we were pretty frustrated, I guess, with where the Agile community was at that point in time. This is about a year and a half, 2 years ago. And we were just talking about the certification aspect of it. We were talking about the project management aspect of it and how we've actually drifted from the core technical practices that we felt were meant to be there. So we wanted to have a conversation, an honest conversation with the Agile Manifesto authors to say, okay, what was it that made you guys come together back in 2001 in Snowbird, Utah, right outside of Salt Lake, and have that meeting, have that series. So we wanted to do a historical look back because there was nothing that we knew of that existed in the public domain that had that conversation. So we figured the best way to do that was a podcast, right? Here comes the arrogant part. I had no idea how to do a podcast. And on top of that, I was going to do it with a bunch of people that I have a high degree of respect for that don't even know my name. But yeah, we're at a bar, we're probably several beers deep, and we're like, yeah, we're going to do this. We set an acceptance criteria of, we're going to talk to 7 of the 17. That's going to be our benchmark. That's our high water mark. We're going to talk to 7 of them. If we do that, we're successful, right? So we started reaching out to the authors in batches of 3. We sent out the first batch of requests to come in. Holy crap. All 3 of them came back almost immediately and said, yes, it's time, we need to do this. So that freaked us out pretty good, and we then started to scramble and said, okay, how do you do a podcast? I swear to God, the very first interview was with John Kern. I want you to listen to it, and I don't want you to listen to it at the same time, because I kid you not, it's my iPhone sitting on top of a beer glass in a crowded bar with us having a conversation like this over it. No equipment, nothing fancy, and there is a drinking theme that's establishing. I'm realizing, and I'm aware of this. But actually, the other accident that kind of came out of this was, and I'm going to move a little faster here, the thing that came out of this was we were trying to do a historic look back. What we found out is the frustration that we shared was shared by these guys. And they actually kind of unraveled why they actually set up the Agile Manifesto. And it kind of resonates with the heart of why we're all here today. We ended up speaking to 14 to 17, so that benchmark that we had of 7, doubled it. Cool. And it took a little while to get through all of these, and we had to work with some scheduling issues. Only 3 that we did not yet get to talk to would be Ward Cunningham, Kent Beck, and Dave Thomas. All of this is available, by the way. The group that kind of came out of that conversation in a bar is called the Agile Uprising. There's a whole podcast now. We actually learned how to do podcasting in the middle of all this. I no longer actually am a member, a host on it. I had to step back because I got a little too busy. But all of these interviews are available. If you really want to find out how horrible you speak, record yourself for 14 hours talking to people that you respect, then go through and listen to it again. But we'll crank through some more content quickly here. The one thing that I kind of found interesting is when we were speaking with Alistair, he shared this thought that they wrote the manifesto to avoid the codification of practices. And if you look at the industry today, there's a lot of codification of practices. Doesn't even, you can look at any software shop that most of these DevOps practitioners are supporting, and they're probably following some heavyweight framework under the banner of some type of agile practice. And it's interesting that we're now getting further away from the original intent. So, like every good talk should, I say I'm going to tell you what the secrets are, right? And then I'm supposed to build into those secrets over time. These are the secrets right here. So we can all go home now. No, it's technical practices, it's strong teams, and it's mindfulness. That's actually what we're going to build into. And I'm telling you, this is one of the last slides. We're going to see it again. But what I want to do is actually explain to you, this is where we're landing. And it should not be a surprise to anyone that this is how you make meaningful teams. This is how you deliver the value very quickly and very sustainably, right? So let's talk about this a little bit. The Agile Manifesto event happened in 2001, like I said, in Snowbird, Utah. When it actually kicked off, it wasn't even called Agile. They literally called it the Lightweight Methods Conference. They held it at a resort. The resort, the sessions were broken into 2.5 days. The first half day was meeting at a bar in the lounge, and the guys were getting together and learning from each other who they were. Back in the day, they didn't have the internet and WebEx and all that good stuff. This is 2001, the Stone Ages. We got some pretty good insights into some of the artifacts that were never really out there in the public before. I love this one. This is Andy Hunt. Actually, for everybody that is technical in the room, you've probably read some books from the Pragmatic Bookshelf. You're familiar with if you saw one cover of them, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. Andy Hunt's the guy that's actually behind the Pragmatic Bookshelf with his partner. But these are, if you look at it at the lower half of this handwriting, those are the 4 Agile principles, the Agile Manifesto principles. I love the fact that there was a lot of intent in the numbering, right? So you can see that it was reordered at least 3 times. The first one never changed. Well, the only thing that changed is they took off social networks, thank God, because, Facebook, and then Kent went and worked at Facebook and got weird. So who did we talk to? We talked to Bob Martin, right? Real quick, Bob Martin, one of the grandfathers of XP, has written a whole bunch of books. The Solid Principles, SOLID, they're basically the framework for solid, use the word to describe the word. They are basically the application development principles that a lot of people point to in computer science is how you should be writing software. Martin Fowler. Anybody a fan of Martin Fowler and his work? Yeah, I figured. Okay. Martin is awesome. And quick plug, we did 2 interviews with Martin. We did the manifesto interview, and then we did one about Agile architecture. And that was a brilliant sit-down with him and Rebecca Worf-Sprock. And if you're not familiar with her, learn your history. Rebecca is a strong, intelligent woman. Spoke with Martin, also one of the godfathers of XP, worked on the C3 project at Chrysler with Kent and Bob. Andy Hunt, spoke about him a little bit. Now you can see what the pragmatic bookshelf styling looks like on their textbook, on their books. So Andy was, we're going to see some quotes from these interviews in the coming slides. You're going to really catch his southern charm as we go through some of his bullets there. Alistair, interesting gentleman. He actually has a lot of experience researching teams, and he had interviewed something like 100 successful delivery teams before the Manifesto event. He kind of talks about what made them successful. The second interview that we did in person actually happened in London. James Grenning, he's a local to Chicago guy, also part of the original C3 project. He, if anybody has done test-driven development before and think it's really hard in software, James is the guy that actually wrote the book on test-driven development for embedded C. So he's doing it in embedded C. If you pull that off, you should be able to do it in software relatively simply. He's also the inventor of the planning poker. Funny story behind that is in the interview, if you want to hear the history there. And then John Kern. John's got an interesting background. He said that he was there by accident. His mentor was the one that was actually invited. He was not able to attend, so he said, John, you go to this crazy thing. Waste your time with it. John came up through the government space, worked with the DoD, and did a lot of flat spin simulation for airplanes and jets and jet propulsion algorithms and all this crazy stuff that is actually rocket science, right? But John is a very strongly opinionated man, and he looks at the principles of the foundation of this country and applies that to software engineering. So if you listen to that interview, if you ever get the opportunity to hear him speak, it's really cool to check out. Last one I'm going to talk with any detail on, and hopefully I'm getting through these quickly for y'all, is Ron Jeffries. Ron is also another one of those XP guys, and he has written quite a few books. The Extreme Programming Explained, that pink book, is in most every engineering shop in the world, I think, at this point. He's very well respected in that space. If anyone's a beer nerd, here's a fun fact. So Ron Jeffries has a son who's named Ron Jeffries, right? I guess version 2. I was talking to Ron, and when he plugged his Twitter, he's like, make sure you look for the computer science Twitter, Ron Jeffries, because my son has an account too, and he owns Jolly Pumpkin Brewing. So if you're a Jolly Pumpkin fan, here's an attachment right back to software. Again, the beer theme, I'm consciously aware of how bad this sounds. All right. We spoke to a bunch of other guys too, and it just had an appreciation for your time. I'm not going to step through all of them. There's probably some familiar faces if you've been in this space before. All of these interviews are available online on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, wherever you find your happy podcast. There's a couple more in there. It's the Agile Uprising. Yeah, or you can get it right from the website, podcast.agileuprising.com. All right, so let's step into that, if you remember that 3-circle Venn diagram. What were those secrets, right? The first one is going to be around technical practices. So when we sat and we talked to these guys, obviously all but one of them were, at the time of the signing, hardcore engineers, right? Jim Highsmith was more of a project management-focused consultant, business strategic consulting type guy. All of the others were hardcore engineers. So technical practices obviously were something that we talked about quite often. And if you're familiar with Bob, the one thing that he is very strongly opinionated about is the concept of apprenticeship. I was having a conversation at dinner, I think it was, a couple nights ago with some of the other speakers, and I said, when you go and you call a plumber, you know that plumber's going to show up, and they're going to have the ability to fix your clogged drain, your frozen pipe. It's freezing out now, so your frozen pipe, because they've gone through an apprenticeship program where they started off as an apprentice, then they went to like a journeyman, a master, whatever that actual process is. That does not exist in software development. The rate at which that we introduce software engineers to the industry is every 5 years it doubles, right? So that literally means more than half of the software engineering practitioners have less than 10 years experience, which there's a lot of juniors out there is kind of the point. And the people that are teaching them are relatively junior themselves. So Bob has a very opinionated stance saying that these technical practices, they're super important, need to be curated within people and teams. Just because the technologies are changing, the tools that we're using are changing, the underpinnings and the computer science engineering practices are pretty much stable. And you just need to go back and gain an appreciation for what proper design and proper architecture looks like. So he wants there to be more of an attention on putting people in apprenticeship to each other. Still in that technical practices space, Andy takes the contrarian stance, and instead of saying you should do this, he goes cynical, right? Agile now means that we do half of Scrum poorly and use Jira. Yeah, damn it, it is. How many people actually agree with this? Damn it, it is. All right. We use Jira now as an interface with people, which is kind of crazy. And everything, we need to get our story points more accurate. The Fibonacci sequence has been bastardized, hasn't it? So Andy's point here more is that we need to actually learn how to operate with technical patterns, with technical people in technical ways, and stop using interfaces as the way that we communicate with each other. He would, if he were standing here, he'd probably be talking more about that pair programming, learning from the heartbeat of the person next to you so that you can actually come up with mindful thought work and knowledge work with better outcomes. So one of the questions that was pretty consistently asked across the spectrum, I appreciate a lot of these guys have families and children, and some don't have families and children. So I wanted to frame a question that would help really answer a lot of the questions that we have for ourselves, but make it personal to them. So the question was, if your nephew or niece today were telling you that they want to get into software engineering, what advice would you have for them, right? And that makes it personal because it's somebody that's in their family, so that matters. And it's not like, what should they study? What, should they be an engineer? Should they be an ops? Should they care about Agile? Should they care about DevOps? Whatever it is. The answer that Alistair gave is the one that's up on the board. He says, hone your technical expertise so that you can contribute, and hone your listening skills, right? So it's kind of interesting that in one breath we're talking about technical expertise, right? Be a good citizen to the engineering community. But at the same time, hone your listening skills. It's like those two things generally don't mesh together. We don't hear that often. And his point there is really, to be a good engineer, you have to be conscious of your environment, your surroundings. I think I'm failing on proving my arrogance right now, so I got to spin that up a little more. So the word engineer, it seems like, I'm not sure if it's a cultural thing or regional thing or what, but I've seen quite often in recent months, years, a pushback on the term engineer, and I don't understand why. And to me, growing up, and even now, I look at people that describe themselves as an engineer, either a systems engineer, a DevOps engineer, just an application software engineer. I look at that as a badge of honor, and it's something that comes with it some great responsibilities. And I think that's kind of what James is talking about when he says, be an engineer and use your problem-solving skill set when appropriate. So the only way that you get to, in my opinion, be a really strong engineer is by experiencing pain and knowing how the decisions that you technically make are inflicted on other people and empathizing with that impact, and to improve your technical ability so much so that you can reduce that impact. Because why do we write software? Why do we work in operations? We're doing it to make things suck less, right? So James is really driving into that point there. So John's again, I think we had about 5 beers before we started recording with John Kern, and his sound bites are amazing. It's just a shame they're captured on an iPhone and not real podcasting equipment. I'm just going to read this one, which is like presenting 101, never do that. Thank God things in this world are not built the way that we build software. Damned if I'm sitting in this building if it was built the way we build software. Think about that from a release perspective, right? We're at a DevOps conference. Would you, if the inspectors that go through and make sure that the house is ready to be released to you for your family to live in, or the building that you're going to work in is ready for you to inhabit it for work, what if they looked at that the way that we kind of patchwork that's called a curse that time. What happens if they took their approach to their job the way that we sometimes take an approach, the way that we release software, we build software? It makes it meaningful, right? So then you take that metaphor and you apply it back. How can we actually be better citizens to the software releases, the infrastructure provisioning, when we set up like these cloud orchestration systems? I'm sorry, these container orchestration systems. Wow. How can we do that with more empathy for the people that are going to be using it, or the people that are going to be supporting it after we're gone, right? Another thing you're not supposed to do as a presenter. When we're talking about technical practices, oftentimes, and I think this actually kind of feeds back to the Bob Martin fact about having a lot of juniors in industry, we look for permission to do things that inherently we know we should be doing anyway. Does that sound familiar? So, one of the extreme programming, remember back when we talked about extreme programming, one of the tenets of extreme programming is the practice of refactoring, going back and, sharpening and hardening your code to make sure that it's as well-groomed as possible. And a lot of times people have refactoring projects, which doesn't make sense. It's just part of how you write software. So Ron really distills that point down when he says, I do not ask for permission to test or refactor, any more than I ask for permission to write an if statement or a for loop, right? For the programmers in the room, that kind of makes sense. All he's saying is he doesn't ask permission to do the right thing. He just does the right thing because that's how you are a technical engineer in a meaningful way today. So hopefully I established that technical practices are clearly important in the world of Agile, in the world of DevOps, and how we practice today. Let's talk about teams for a quick minute. When we sit there in Martin's interviews, I think if it wasn't for me being on them, I would say they're really good. But he talks about cargo cult, and I'm going to assume somebody here doesn't know what that means. And all that really means is that you go through the motions of the thing just to say that you're doing the thing without actually appreciating why you're doing it, not actually understanding the root cause behind it. So it goes back also to what Andy Hunt said about what Agile means now is that you do half of Scrum and use Jira, right? That's what we actually think Agile is at this point. And that's kind of what Martin's talking about. Mindful teams actually understand the principles and the interfaces that they have with each other. And they realize the impact of these things. And when they go through the ceremonies, you don't grunt and walk into a retrospective. You go into the retrospective to actually groom your team, to enhance your relationships and your collaboration. That's really what Martin was talking about at that point. And you speak to Ron Jeffries, who at this point is pretty gruff at times, especially when you get into a nice Twitter argument with him. He's really good on that. This is where we're going to start stepping into some DevOps principles pretty obviously, right? We need to know deeply that we haven't broken the system. There's probably been a few talks in the last day or two about monitoring, logging, and alerting. I know that we have some of the monitoring, logging, and alerting sponsors here. Having an appreciation, like a team that owns their system and knows the health of their system at all times is a good team, because they then have the responsibility of making sure that their systems are available, right? I like that I see Martin's name before it paints. I'm like, oh, this is going to be a good one. This one is kind of meaningful to me because this is the outcome of the question that I asked Martin, where if your niece or nephew were going to be entering the industry, what advice would you have? And I'm fortunate. I work for a company that is very good, and I feel like I'm surrounded by some of the smartest engineers, some of the smartest practitioners I've ever been lucky enough to come in contact with, and I get to do it on a day-to-day basis. On my worst days where I'm not productive at all, I still feel like I'm a much better engineer than I was before I walked in the door. And I know whenever my time at Contino comes to an end, I will be in a position that is so much better than I would have been had I done anything else with my time, right? So when Martin comes back and he talks about strong teams, his stance is find a place that is doing a really good job and immerse yourself in that place. So Martin, if you're not familiar, is I think he's called the chief scientist of ThoughtWorks. And I saw Go was out there, so Go is actually a byproduct of some ThoughtWorks projects. And Martin loves ThoughtWorks. I think he's been there for damn near 20 years now. And his stance is that you surround yourself with very bright people, and you then become even more intelligent. If you're the most smart person in the room, you know, the saying is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. It's actually true, right? You're not growing your brain if all you're doing is answering other people's questions. If you're not learning yourself by the people that you're surrounding yourself with, find new people. And you know what? Just to take a second, these types of events, right? These DevOps days, just by the nature of sitting in these chairs and on the benches back there and standing wherever you are, I think you already believe in this. That's why you're here, right? This is a commitment. We're almost at 5 o'clock on a Friday in New York City, and we're still sitting here learning from each other. So I wasted a slide by telling you something you already know. We'll keep moving. I do realize it is pretty much happy hour in New York, and I keep talking about beer, so we should move. One of the central concepts that people lose is the thought of adaptation, right? So how often do we do things in our jobs, and I'm not asking for a show of hands here, but how often do we do things because that's the way that we've always done them, right? Knowing, hands down, that there are better ways to do it. And I'm not saying completely throw everything out and just redo your deployment pipelines or your containerization strategy, but constantly experiment and tweak and measure and make sure that you understand that you're adapting and you're making things healthier. You're going to be wrong, right? I mean, I'm the only person I know that's right all the time, right, Contino? You're going to be wrong, but you have to go through and you have to take those small iterative steps forward so that you're improving the status quo, the standard operating procedure of your organization. That last circle, right? Mindfulness. Let's talk about mindfulness for a second. Mindfulness it's the ability to empathize and to be, you've heard of emotional IQ, EQ, having that in the context of your teams, your systems, your customers, your users, your stakeholders, all of that good stuff. And if you remember what I said about Bob having that really strong sense of a need for apprenticeship, he says, I don't want to boil all of Agile down to one word or phrase, but it does boil down to pride of workmanship, right? Now, we're standing here at DevOps days, or I'm standing, most of you are sitting. Take out Agile and just put the word DevOps in there, right? It still resonates really hard, doesn't it, right? We should be very proud of the work that we do every single day. And if we're not, that's a really good indicator that we need to start doing those small experiments and start tweaking the system, or we need to surround ourselves with people that make us better. At Martin again, it's going to be a good one. If you're in the mud, you aren't going to go anywhere. Big, chunky, dirty, monolithic systems that take hours to release, and every time you release it, you find out 3 services that were microserviced are actually version dependent, and the whole thing starts burning down around you. We're talking about not going anywhere. Sometimes we create systems and we create these release pipelines that are actually inhibiting us from moving forward. So being aware of the decisions that we're making when we make them and how they impact our system's health, our users' health. I know of teams today still that do releases at off hours on nights and weekends. And if you think about the impact, let's talk about mindfulness. How, as a manager, can I look at myself in the mirror knowing that I'm taking a mother, a father, a brother, or a sister out of their family, putting them on a call at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning for 2 or 3 hours on a Friday night, so that Saturday when they get up and that's their downtime to be with their family, they're going to be grumpy, they're going to be sleeping in, they're going to be pissed off, they're going to be handling support tickets. Just be mindful of the decisions that we make so that we make better systems that are more highly resilient and able to handle change. Again, John did actually not have, everything he said wasn't cynical, but okay. I don't think I would add just don't do Scrum, damn it. Use your brain. Do the right thing, empower your teams. That's why we're here today, right? That's what we want to do. We want to get smarter, and we want to have empowerment in our systems and our teams. So again, these were the secrets that I kind of feel were distilled. When you take all 14 of those interviews and you distill them down, these were the secrets that kind of came out. There's actually another secret that not even a secret, something that for all the females and the minorities in the room, we did ask the question, why is it that there were 17 old white guys that wrote the manifesto, right? I will share with you the answer that we got because I think, it's worth being said. If you haven't heard this answer before, here it is. So Ron Jeffries gave me this. He said at the time there was initially a gathering called the Rogue River Gathering. It was an XP conference, sort of like the manifesto event, but nothing actually came out of it. That was the sphere of influence that they had, and that was mostly old white guys. So when they came together and they started figuring out who did they want to pull in from outside the XP community, there was nobody in their sphere of influence that they knew that were not just old white guys. He said at the time, looking back now, there were folks that were involved in the community that he should have had included, and that is the one regret that they had, because that was one of the other questions, what do you regret? That was the regret, that they did not actually open the door a little bit wider to people like Mary Poppendick, to people like Rebecca Werfs-Brock, to others that were actively involved in the community, but just were not in their circle. So that stone got a little bit unturned in the middle of the interview. So I just want to make sure that gets through. However, I did lie to you. These were the secrets that I think were pretty blaringly obvious when you go through the interview session. Oh boy, I did not know my slides. Pretend I didn't just say that. All right, so teams need to build commitment to be the engineers that they intend to every day, right? When we're talking about strong teams, that's what we mean. Mindfulness, creating a strong sense of empathy for the teams and the users, so it binds the approach and the intent to the outcomes. And then technical practices. I mean, everybody's in here because we believe in the technical practices, hardening and evolving with the market. But build a deep respect for the craft of software engineering. For this, build respect for DevOps. Build respect for your users and your systems up and downstream. And learn from the thought leaders before you. Just because a book was published, I mean, Tom, when was your first book published? 2004? 2001. There's still value in that book today. Well, I'm not going to ask you because you'll probably be a little humble, but there's still value in that book. That book is 17 years old now. Pick it up, read it, right? He's extended it, he's versioned it, but there's still deep value in that. Just because these things are a little bit, dusty sometimes, doesn't mean that they're not good. So here's where I was lying to you. There's intersection points, right? So the technical practices intersect with the mindfulness and they intersect with the strong teams. What you start seeing is the emergence of the people, process, and technology, right? Make it up. I saw pictures. I moved too fast. When you start having those intersections, you start seeing where these things come out. So that becomes the lifeblood of our organization. And if you're a DevOps practitioner, you probably have heard of this people, process, and technology before. That's actually where the secrets start to come together, and that's where these things start to really materialize into something meaningful for this audience. So, I'm assuming there are some people here that support systems that are in the cloud. So, the cloud and orchestration, so things like Kubernetes, OpenShift, Swarm, they are a means to create wild and reckless resource and financial risk, financial waste for your company if you don't know what you're doing, right? I can spin up 10,000 instances right now. That's awesome. I can use Terraform script and just completely smoke a whole bunch of my CapEx for the rest of the year. My point here is when you look at these things and you're thinking about the principles that we kind of talked through today, you need to learn from stand on the shoulders of giants. If you haven't been in the space before, go back to those resources. Sometimes bring in a strong team that's able to wrap their arms around you and guide you through the things that you haven't done before. But one more intersection, right? So we have the people, process, and technology. In the center, we actually are talking about flow. When you have a strong team and you have the people collaborating, communicating in a strong way, and then you have a process that is actually dictated by the people that supports the way that they take a single concept and push it into production. And then you have the tools that actually supplement the process, rather than having the tools dictate the process that the people then hate. You go through the proper progression, you actually have flow, right? You have sustainable pace. You have the ability to, with high confidence, release software to a production system at a very repeatable, very fast pace with the ability to know that you're not going to break the system because we have instrumented, we have telemetry and all that good stuff. So really, when I talk about the secrets, I cheated when I told you that I was giving you the last slide first. This is what we're talking about with the secrets. And to be completely honest, when I talk about the secrets, I'm talking about DevOps. So, one last little bit. We have a free community. It's a Slack community. There's no marketing. There's no advertising and nothing. It's wide open. It's global. Quite a few members already. If you're interested, if you want to clog your system with one more Slack channel, go for it. It's DevOps Debate. It's you can sign up at DevOpsDebate.com. Like I said, it's just a really good open, free community for people to talk about things like containers, to talk about things like cloud, you know, all of that good stuff. So I came in under. So who wants to throw questions at the guy? Honestly, is there any questions? Well, first of all, that they said yes. I think that one of the biggest, like for me, one of the biggest things was, sorry, the question was, what was one of the biggest surprises that I walked away saying whoa from, right? And the true story behind this hasn't been revealed, but that actual 4-bullet manifesto thing, the way that actually happened wasn't that all 17 guys were sitting around and they all threw these ideas together. They were actually on a break. So they did 3 sessions. They did a morning session, an afternoon session, an evening session with large chunks of time between them. What happened was 3 or 4 people got around an easel and they literally just wrote those ideas down. They will not tell you who the 3 or 4 people were, and one person was the one actually writing it. And then when the whole team reconvened, they talked through it, and that's when they really said, oh my God, that's it. And then the other really cool thing is the process that they went through to come up with the word Agile. Because if you remember the placard, it said the Lightweight Methods Conference. I don't know, I just think I always assumed that they called it the Agile Manifesto, they called it the Agile Conference. What they did is, if you're familiar with XP, index cards are really important. So all of the XP guys come in with index cards, and they said, let's everybody write down what we should call this thing and throw it in the middle of the room. So you have the 5 XP guys are all jotting shit down, throwing it out there. Everyone else was like scrambling to find index cards. So then eventually they throw them out there, and they chose Agile because it's the one that they hated the least, right? Some of the other ones were like adaptive, and a few others I can't remember off the top of my head. But those are 2 little bits I took away. Yeah, so to summarize the question, did anybody feel like they should have changed anything? Which, to be 100% honest, that was one of the questions that was universally asked. And it was universally answered this way: no. They stand behind what was said. The only change that they shared was what I said with Ron, is he wished that there was some inclusion of women and minorities. They did a panel, the 15-year anniversary, and that question was also asked. That's available on YouTube from the ones that actually attended it. And again, they stand behind the fact that they wouldn't have changed anything. It's 4 bullets, right? If you think about it, it's really only 4 bullets. They didn't say a damn thing about certifications or like methods or frameworks. They literally had 4 bullets, and they said they stand behind all 4 of those still. Cool.
All right.
Thank you.